Hello, Pinterest and Mosaic ladies. Uh, we as a team, we miss you all so much. And we haven't been able to meet together, obviously, but we've been praying for you. And we're going to be meeting as a team on a Zoom meeting sometime in the next couple of weeks to talk about what our next steps will look like. We know that our Pinterest ministry, the way that we've run it in the past for the last 5 years, 6 years, we're not going to be able to use that same model this year. Childcare prohibits us from being able to have all those kiddos in the building with our aged population of childcare volunteers who are usually the ones taking care of our little ones. And in addition to that, we have a lot of the moms that are going to be homeschooling this year. And so it won't look the same. It'll look different, but we're hoping to return to better. And we're not sure what that looks like. We're not sure what time of the day or night it will be, what day of the week it will be, what exactly we're going to be doing. But I want you to know that it is the heart of the leadership of this church to continue ministering to the women in our community, however God calls us to do that. So that's in the plan. But for today, some of you have been part of Pinterest and Mosaic for several years, and you've maybe gotten to hear our previous pastor, Mark Swirsky, give a talk on people who he has affectionately termed EGRs. There are people who require extra grace required. Well, he was kind enough before he started a job in Oklahoma to videotape this devotional for us. And at the end of the devotional, Jackie and Victoria and our summer intern, Lissa Sargent, and I had kind of a roundtable discussion that we recorded on Zoom to kind of share more thoughts about it. To tell you the truth, it's going to be about 45 minutes long. And so you may have to wait and watch this at a time when your kids are in bed or they're busy doing something else. But we hope that it ministers to your heart and it encourages you. But we wanted to do something to help you get through these times. So watch Pastor Mark's video and then stick around for our roundtable discussion. And be looking in the next few weeks for an update on what we'll be doing for the 2020-21 Pinterest year. Love you, ladies.
Is there someone in your life that drives you crazy? Is there someone when you see them coming, your stomach knots all up inside? Is there someone who talks so incessantly that you'd love to put your hand over their mouth and tell them to shut up? Is there someone in your extended family who you wish was in someone else's family? Is there someone in your life whose absence would improve the quality of your life? I refer to these people as EGRs, extra grace required, because it takes a great measure of God's grace to put up with them. I had a really amazing EGR when I was a single man. She developed a crush on me and I wasn't interested in her. And she used a number of tactics to try to get my attention, two of which included suicide attempts. Once she called me and told me that she had overdosed on some drugs, and so I went and got her and got my friend Christy, who was also in the singles group, and we had to take her to the hospital and they pumped her stomach out. But the worst time was when she called me and told me that she had gotten some poison from the lab. We both worked at the same lab together, and she had a syringe and she was going to inject herself with poison. And I knew she had access to poison. I knew she had access to syringes, and so I assumed she was telling me the truth. So I drove over to her apartment, and I parked the car, and I looked up at her second floor apartment, and she was standing out at the railing, and she was holding up in her right hand the syringe. And so I climbed up the stairs and went to her and asked her to hand it over to me. Now, at that moment, I was a little afraid that she might stick me with it. And so I held out my hand, and she pointed the syringe at me and then gave it to me safely. And I walked her down to my car and walked by the apartment dumpster and threw the syringe away, and then we drove to Christy's house to talk again. I wish I had known then what I know now about how God uses EGRs in our life. And that's what I want to talk about. And I want to share from example in David's life 2 key insights about EGRs that will help us to relate to them in a healthy way. And I'm going to be reading from 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 5 through 13. But let me tell you first what's happened before this moment. So David had multiple wives, which was itself a bad mistake. But one son, whose name was Ammon, got interested in one of David's other daughters by another wife, whose name was Tamar. And he became thoroughly enraptured by her and decided that he wanted to get to know her a lot better. And she kind of rebuffed his efforts, but he decided to play sick and asked for her to come nurse him back to health. And when she was alone with him, he took advantage of her and essentially raped her. And after that, he had nothing to do with her. He wouldn't marry her. He treated her disdainfully. David found out about that. He got very angry, but he didn't do too much more than just kind of slap Amnon on the wrist. And Tamar had a brother by the name of Absalom, and he was outraged at what Amnon had done, and he became angry at David when he saw that David wasn't going to do anything very serious to Amnon. He waited for a while, and then finally he took matters into his own hands, and he killed his half-brother Amnon. Well, David was mad at him for doing that. Absalom fled the country and went into exile, and David was quite willing for it to stay that way, but he was encouraged by others to bring his son back from exile, so he finally did that, but then he ignored Absalom. Well, as you can imagine, all these slights and failures on David's part sparked in Absalom a deep resentment for his father, and so Absalom eventually led a revolt against David and was quite successful in turning most of the country against David. And our story is going to pick up, David is on the run. He has left Jerusalem. He's fleeing for his life with those who remain faithful to him. And this particular incident occurs, a man who is of the tribe of Benjamin, which was Saul's tribe, confronts David, and I want to read that story for you. So I'm going to start. This is 2 Samuel chapter 16, starting in verse 5. When King David came to Bahurim, behold, there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came out cursing continually as he came. He threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were at his right hand and at his left. That's David's right and left. Thus Shimei said when he cursed, "Get out! Get out, you man of bloodshed and worthless fellow. The Lord has returned upon you all the bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. And behold, you are taken in your own evil, for you are a man of bloodshed." Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over now and cut off his head." But the king said, "What have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah? If he curses, and if the Lord has told him, 'Curse David,' Then who shall say, why have you done so? Then David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my son, who came out from me, seeks my life. How much more this Bethlehemite? Let him alone, and let him curse, for the Lord has told him. Perhaps the Lord will look on my affliction and return good to me instead of cursing this day. So David and his men went on the way, and Shimei went along on the hillside parallel with him. And as he went, he cursed and cast stones and threw dust at him. The king and all the people who were with him arrived weary, and he refreshed himself there. It's almost a humorous picture. Shimei is picking up rocks to throw at David and his men, and when he can't find any rocks, he just picks up a handful of dirt and throws it, which of course that wasn't going to do anything. But imagine how embarrassing this was for David. Here this man is not only cursing him publicly in front of all David's loyal people, but he's claiming that God has turned against David and has given the kingdom over to Absalom, things that David knew were not true about God. And he's really just being a complete source of aggravation and irritation. Now, I want you to recognize the perspective and insight that David had that enabled him to respond to Shimei in a healthy way. And David's perspective was God was behind Shimei's actions. See, David recognized the truth that we all need to recognize, and the truth is this, that God is sovereign in our lives, and He is the one who controls and brings people into our lives, even those people who are EGRs to us. And David said in this story that he recognized the way he responded to Shimei would either bring blessing from God or would not bring blessing from God. And so David recognized that God was doing something to David in this situation through Shimei. So how does this work for us? Well, what God most wants from us, if we are followers of Jesus Christ, is that we become like Jesus Christ. So if we need patience, God brings someone into our life with whom we need to be patient. If we need courage or faith, God brings someone into our life who might be a threat to us that requires us to exercise courage and faith. If we need to grow in compassion, God might bring into our life someone who's really needy and needs our compassion. Or He might bring someone into our life with whom we have to be patient if we need patience. That's what God does with EGRs in our life. He uses EGRs as tools to conform us to the image of Christ. And so, in a way, they are a blessing to us, even though we don't feel like they are, because they are God's tool to make us into the kind of person we probably want to be, but would never become unless we had such a person in our life. Now, that's the first key insight into David's story. But there's a second key insight, and it's this. David himself was an EGR. Now, he was a fabulous king, but he was a lousy father. And you can see it in the life of Absalom. He really failed Absalom. He failed Tamar. He really didn't defend Tamar. He didn't get justice for her with what happened to her. And thus he angered his son Absalom. And he didn't exercise discipline on Amnon when he should have. And he ignored Absalom when he brought Absalom back. He gave him incomplete forgiveness and reconciliation. I mean, you could just go on and on about David's failures with Absalom and his other children. He really was an EGR to his kids. And the truth is, each of us is an EGR to someone else. And that's what we also need to remember when dealing with people, is that we are probably an EGR to someone else. And so here's where the golden rule comes into play. treat the EGRs in your life as you would want others to treat you with whom you are an EGR to them. So if we will take these two insights from the life of David, it will really help us to respond to those difficult people in a better way. First, realize that God uses those people to make us like Christ, and how we respond to them will determine whether God blesses us or not. And second, we're probably an EGR to someone else, so show them grace like we want people to show us grace. You do that, and you will respond to those difficult people in the right way.
Guys, Victoria Holderness here. I just wanted to give a little brief introduction about Extra Grace Required people. And for those of us who have been at Hope Fellowship for a little while, we have heard our former pastor, Pastor Mark, talk about this before. And so we kind of have gotten used to some of the things that our flesh wants to sort of have tendency towards. And one of those things is shortening the word Extra Grace Required to calling them EGRs, but not in the way that maybe Pastor Mark had wanted us to do. Sometimes we might have a tendency to think of them with a derogatory or sort of rolling your eyes, oh, EGR people. And what we don't want is we don't want to have that tendency. We want to do and be representatives of Christ the way God intends for us to do it. And so what we want to do is really think about extra grace required for people in our life the way that God would like us to set it up. One of those things is to think about the word grace and think about it more in terms of gift. When we interact with people, and if we think about it in terms of a gift, where gifts are often not earned, they're not deserved, they're not expected anything in return when we give a gift to somebody. And in this case, it's something where we're required to give. Maybe it costs us something, right? It costs us a little bit of something to provide it for somebody else. In fact, if the gift didn't cost us something, sometimes it's not really a gift from us, right? So when we're interacting with people where there's extra grace required, we really want to think about it in terms of how we can share something that costs us a little of something to give to somebody else in our life, and let it be freely given with joy, so that we can benefit the people around us that are maybe extra grace required. And then also, one thing to note is that we're not exempt from this group. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go into questions and answers around the table. Before we get into any questions, I want everybody to introduce themselves. So if you'd like to start, Michelle.
Hello, ladies. Michelle Davenport, Children's Director at Hope Fellowship and the leader of the Pinterest and Mosaic teams. And we sure just miss you so much. So glad to be here. And we just wanted to give you a little nugget of something to hold you over till we're together again.
Lissa, if you'd like to go next.
My name is Lissa Sargent, and I am the summer intern for the Youth and Children's Ministry at Hope Fellowship this month.
Awesome. Jacqueline?
Hey ladies, I'm Jacqueline Rogers, and I've been on the Pinterest team since the very beginning, and with Michelle, and just missing you ladies and seeing your faces.
Awesome. Okay, let's dig into the first question. Our first question is going to be, what are some lessons and or blessings that you have learned from your EGRs? What things in your personality are very sort of worked out? And I think I'm in line to go first here, it says. So one of the things I wanted to talk about for me is that I have noticed with the people that are EGRs in my life that oftentimes they have repeating personality traits. And I noticed that these sort of personality traits are things that I personally also need to work out in my own life. So it has been important for me to think about what are these personality traits? Why do they keep coming out? And what do I need to work on in my own life to help kind of flesh that out and maybe die more to myself and live more for the Lord? For example, arrogance or pride or insecurities, and just sort of me sort of self-involved. And that's been something that's been really important for me to really pay attention to, is why do these specific people and specific traits keep showing up in my life? So that's just something to note. Alyssa, if you'd like to answer this.
Yeah. I think for myself, I've learned just with my personality type, I tend to hold in my feelings and not really be upfront with how I'm truly feeling. And then it just leads to me kind of bubbling up and exploding at people at random times. And so especially being in college, I'm going to my third year, and I live with 3 other girls in a suite, close quarters. So just having to learn to not keep it inside and like be upfront and honest with them to begin with, just have that respect for them and for myself so that we can talk it out just like right here, right now, instead of 2 weeks when we're yelling at each other. It's been really helpful just kind of getting it out there at the very beginning.
That's great, Lissa. Thank you. If we can have Michelle, would you like to answer this next?
You know, as I thought through this, one of the lessons that I learned from people who I have complicated relationships with is that I'm usually the common denominator. If someone requires extra grace for me to stand to be around them or minister to them, I'm learning that it probably, the road goes both ways on that. And so I'm having to learn about myself and what things set me off and why. I did discover that some of the people that I am most irritated by remind me of things about my mom when my mom was not well. My mom was an alcoholic for many years of my life as a child, and there are personality traits that she did not have anymore after she recovered and she was well. But occasionally I'll meet somebody that triggers some of that stuff and triggers some of those emotions in me. And that is more about God healing more of these places in me. And so I have to do my own work before I can start, blaming other people for being an irritation to me.
That's good. Jacqueline?
Yeah, I think I've definitely learned in dealing with my extra grace required people that a lot of the times it's because I'm getting caught up in focusing on things that are my opinion, or maybe something that's just more my conviction. These aren't things that have much eternal value. I can think of a lot of times where, especially as a mom, I would have other moms who were my EGRs, but really it's because I was getting caught up on maybe their parenting style, which was neither wrong nor right, but I was taking kind of an offense to it. So really being able to appreciate the differences and how God created us all different. And even this week, the sermon that we had spoke to this. It was talking about in Philippians, the verse where it talks about do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility counts others as more significant, and how I come to the table with strengths and weaknesses, but my EGRs come with pretty much the opposite strengths and the opposite weaknesses. So learning that I need them, that I'm not whole without them. And when they leave, like there's a hole left that's not filling me up anymore, if that kind of makes sense. But really focusing on their differences are what is refining me, and that it's really not that important. So
Thank you. I love that how each of us handles our EGRs. There are EGRs for different reasons for each of us. And yet what God shows us is that each of us needs to work on our hearts as we approach the people in our life. That's awesome. Okay, the next question is, how do I know when an EGR is from God or is an unhealthy interaction? How do I decide whether I need to set boundaries in our friendship or decide that we can no longer be friends. And Lissa, we're going to start with you this time.
Yeah. Well, I had this friend, and we always kind of rubbed each other the wrong way, but we loved each other. And we've been friends for a good 4 or 5 years. And then something had happened where I think we were just both really hurt. And it had gotten to the point where, like, when we were around each other, there was just anger and bitterness. And I think that's kind of when we both realized, like, maybe it's time to take a step back, not in the friendship, but like take a step back, take some time to heal, self-care work, before we try to continue being, best friends or whatever. So just realizing that, like, the friendship was not beneficial to either of us at that point in our lives, but then also being open to reconciling the friendship a little bit further down once we both kind of come to terms and healed a bit.
That's great. Thank you, Lissa. Jacqueline, if you could touch on this next.
Yeah. I think I have a specific interaction with a woman in mind. And I definitely came to a place. She was a lot. She rubbed me the wrong way. She said things that, classically just like made me cringe. But I really needed to press into that and realizing I had to spend a lot of time praying about, like, God, what is wrong with her? Okay. And it took a few times of praying that to realize, okay, God, what, like, show me what in myself that needs purified. What am I missing here? Because, God just kept bringing her into my life and showing me that, like, I wasn't going to be able to just run away from her, that I needed to spend time with her. And so as he kept bringing her to mind, and I kept having to pray about her and praying to love her, and I ended up, like, spending more time with her. And it was a bit on the COVID side. So there was a lot of, like, Zoom calls and face-to-face FaceTime calls, and just really investing in that relationship, even though at the onset it was not at all like the plan or the place that I had wanted to be. And it came around because it turned out that God was really setting me up to be in a good place. She came into some struggles and some sin issues that needed to be lovingly talked about with her. And there really wasn't anybody else to do that with her. But since I had spent so much time really praying for her and even praying with her and investing in her life, I can see that God had me in that place so that I could be that person to come alongside her and kind of walk out those things with her. And I feel like being in anything where we're going to identify someone who may be an unhealthy relationship or interaction, you have to do all of that footwork beforehand. You have to be praying for them. You have to be even reaching out to them, letting God really direct you. And there was also a place where I had sought godly counsel. I sought other women in not a gossip way, but in a, I'm in over my head and I need you to speak truth to me so that I really know that what I feel like God is directing me to do, that this is true. So I think in anything, before being able to turn away and say this is an unhealthy place, you kind of have to, I don't know, for me, for this situation, I had to be full, all in, completely willing to do whatever it is that God was calling me to. And for a while that looked like building relationship with her. So yeah, I think that would be something, how you decide when and how to set boundaries. You kind of have to do all the loving them first.
Yeah, that's good, Jacqueline. Thank you. Michelle?
And I would add to that one of my first ministry interactions was somebody that really reminded me so much of my mother. And is I had to ask God to place love in my heart where I knew there wasn't any. And I didn't. She drove me crazy. Her kid drove me crazy. Blah, blah, blah. And at that point, everything she did, I was critical in my heart over it. And I had to ask God to put love in my heart for her. But, you know, one of the things that I think of is that a lot of times when it's like Pastor Mark talked about the woman that was his EGR, you know, he was placed there to minister to her. He was caught in the crossfire of what was going on in her life and the things she was struggling with. And I have noticed a lot of times in my life, there are people that really grind me, and yet God's working something out in them, and I can give them the gift of that grace, like you were saying, Victoria, and I can hang in there until God tells me to cut ties, and sticking with it while God's working through them, through me, to change some things in their life, like you had to do, Jacqueline. That's a gift to somebody, to not be the one that left them. And when we think about friendships and we think about our relationships, especially in church, we can get relationship and church hopping, looking for a place to land where there are no EGRs. And that place does not exist this side of heaven. We're going to run into those people wherever we go. Changing churches, changing friendships, changing schools, even changing roommates does not always rid you of the people that drive you crazy, because at the end of the day, it's what does God have you doing and where does he have you in ministry? And so when it comes time to decide about boundaries, you know, it is good to set boundaries. If somebody is ever trying to pull you out away from your husband, from your godly relationships, from your church family, if somebody's ever trying to isolate you and pull you away from other good, healthy relationships, that's a warning flag. You don't ever let anyone, male or female, tell you that you need to get rid of other people in your life. And so you might need to set some healthy boundaries if somebody's trying to control all those little parts of your life. Don't let them do that to you.
I think that's really important, Michelle. Thank you for sharing that. The last thing I wanted to note is I think what Michelle's saying is very, very important, that when there's really unhealthy places, we need to kind of let go and not allow people to control all of our walks. But at the same time, there's a meme that goes around quite often about how if friendships wear you out or don't fill you with joy, then you should let them go. And we have to be careful to weigh whether they're toxic and are manipulating and controlling us versus if they're just hard situations or hard friendships. Because I think as a Christ follower, as a believer, sometimes hard relationships or even exhausting relationships, sometimes God calls us to that. He doesn't ask us to live an easy life. Sometimes there is suffering, and it's iron sharpening iron, as I think Jacqueline mentioned. It's good to remember, like what Lisa was saying, that sometimes we need to take some self-care for sure. But just make sure that we're not trying to make it easy, and really seeking the Lord, like everybody has said, really seeking him to decide what is his wisdom and how can we direct our friendships that way. Those are great, guys. Our next question is, how can I work on not being an EGR myself? And we're going to have Michelle go first on this one.
Oh man, the joke used to be, if I was the most difficult person in the room to get along with, then we could all maybe handle it. I can be an EGR to people that I love dearly. And one thing that's really helped me in the last few months is studying my Enneagram. And I have a psychology degree, so I've taken all these little Briggs-Myers and all this stuff, but nothing's been more clarifying to me than the Enneagram study, because it does bring in our relationship with God. But the other thing it's done is it's helped me see how I relate to other people. And I have one son who we are thick as thieves, and we get each other and we fight, we go to the mat and we make up and everything's great. We can work the thing out. My same interaction, if I had that mirrored interaction with another one of my children, they say to me, my heart hears you yelling, even if you're not raising your voice. When you use a direct tone, my heart hears you yelling. So understanding the different personalities and enneagrams of the people that I'm close to and I love, and understanding how I tend to communicate and the way I think, I've had to modify how I love and approach and talk to my people. And I encourage you, if you need some self-awareness, you might look into the Enneagram study, because I don't want to hurt the people I love. But then again, if you chew too loud, you might be making me mad. And I might tell you. That's just me. And I realize that's not cool. That's just something I'm irritated by. That doesn't make you an EGR. That makes me an EGR for being irritated by you. And so I have to just know myself. And that's been really helpful to me.
That's really good, Michelle. Thank you. Lisa, you want to follow that up?
Sure. Everything in my life sort of relates to college right now, because that's where I'm at. But one of my business classes, our professor was talking about, how can you get the most out of your career as a young professional, and how can you improve upon yourself to become the best professional you can be. And one of the things he said was, open yourself to constructive criticism and make sure that the superiors and the workers all around you know that you are open to receiving their criticism and learning from it and growing from it. And I think the same can be true of our friendships. I mean, obviously it's going to be a little bit of a different dialect, but just being approachable goes a long way, and it really strengthens your friendships, because if they feel comfortable approaching you when you're being, your EGR, and you feel comfortable approaching them when maybe they're being EGR, it really opens up a space for you to move forward from that and really strengthen the friendship. So I think that's one thing I've learned for sure.
That's really good. Thank you, Lissa. Let's move on to the next question, which is also our last question of the day. What are some practical steps that we can take when interacting with our EGRs? And Jacqueline, I'd like you to start off on this one.
I think top of the line is obviously praying, like I said earlier, like praying to just recognize in ourselves things that need to be brought to light, praying for other people in any circumstance, whether that be, okay, I'm getting ready to go have lunch with someone I consider an EGR, and I need to pray for the way I see them, understanding who God sees them to be, just that my words would be glorifying to God and not my own opinions and that kind of thing. I'm sure we could dive super deep into how much we need to be praying for other people and for ourselves. But I think the other thing I've really found was, especially the idea of other people's strengths and weaknesses are, different from mine. And instead of focusing so much on their weaknesses, which is what I feel like I do when I'm considering my EGRs, really spending a lot of time in being thankful for their strengths and identifying them, being able to even speak that to them as, a way to encourage them. In scripture, it says it's really hard to be praying for someone and then speak evil about them. So I think the more that we're focused on being thankful for them, the harder it is for us to sit in that unhappy place.
That's really good, Jacqueline. Thank you. Lissa, would you like to answer this one next?
Yeah, I'd say similarly for me, I have a prayer journal. It really helps me just sort of process my emotions and what's emotion versus what I think the Spirit is leading me to do. Being in the Word every day is really important, just reminding yourselves of the truths and what God would have for your life. And then, as I was saying earlier, being open to reconciliation. I think for me, realizing that nothing anyone has done to you is unforgivable, was really big, and able to kind of recognize that, it's okay. I can come back from this and we can move forward with our relationship. Those were 3 things that were really big for me.
I think that's really good. Thanks, Lissa. In closing, I really, one of the things that I think this kind of even goes back to how I cannot be EGR too, but one of the things that I always feel so convicted is to examine my heart first. And I think several of us have mentioned that, is really we need to know whether we're being prideful or whether we're not doing the right thing for, like, even how Jacqueline had talked about, if we don't have love in our heart for the people that we're interacting with. If God calls us to love our enemies, then clearly he's calling us to love our friends that are maybe a little hard to interact with. Matthew 7 has been really, really important in my life, just to make sure that I'm handling the log in my eye, so that I can help a speck in somebody else's eye. If I've got this huge sin issue that I need to work on, I don't have the right to even get upset or angry at somebody else if I'm already dealing with that in my own heart. And then just being in a place of humility, which I think Alyssa talked on a little bit about how understanding that we have to be open to criticism and that's constructive, but we have to come at it from a humble heart that is willing to think of others as more significant than ourselves, and really asking God how he wants us to interact. I've had a situation where I held on to it for too long and didn't really talk it out. And that was not God's plan, right? God wants us to not hold on to anything and not be bitter about anything. So if we're holding on to something, that's not God's word, that's not God's will for us. And then being willing to be sensitive to whatever God is directing us to do, whether it's to be friends with somebody, to pray for somebody, to just confess and really repent of our own actions. I think even just praying and processing before we go and meet up with people, but to have the right perception of them, the way God has the perception of them, is really, really important. And I'm sure there's lots more. If anybody has anything else to add, is there anything else that anybody wants to share, or has everybody kind of shared everything they need to share? All good? Okay. In closing, we really want to be here for you guys. Like Michelle said, she's in charge of the Pinterest and Mosaic. So if you guys have any questions or anything, you can follow up with her and she'll have that information available. Thank you so much.